Some of us are born to break barriers. I just didn't know I'd bleed for mine. My name is Sophia. I am 27 years old and I wear the uniform of a soldier, not because I wanted to prove something to the world, but because I wanted to protect it. I grew up in a small, rigid town. Tradition ruled everything. A woman belonged in the kitchen, not on a battlefield. My mother worked herself to the bone while raising me, and my grandfather, a war veteran, used to sit me on his lap and tell stories. I wanted to be like him, to do something that mattered. At 14, I lost my younger brother during a riot. He was just a child. That moment burned something into me, a need, a purpose. I didn't want to be a bystander anymore, so I enlisted, against everyone's wishes. My mother didn't speak to me for 2 years. People said I was foolish, that I was weak, that I wouldn't last a day. But the first time I put on that uniform, it felt like armor for my soul. Training broke me. I cried in the cold. I bled through my boots. I failed over and over. But each time I stood back up, I felt stronger. The day I completed my 72-hour winter op, frostbitten and exhausted, I earned the respect of everyone. Then came the squad, my first family in uniform. Sergeant Khaled, our team leader, was a quiet mountain of a man. He became my mentor. There was also Luca, always laughing, always reckless, and Brielle, another woman, fierce and smart. We were misfits, but we belonged to each other. We trained in jungles and deserts, climbed mountains, ran for hours under full gear. I remember the blisters, the hunger, the tears we never showed. We became hardened not by hate, but by the weight of our duty. I remember one freezing night on recon duty, staring into a pitch-black forest, gun in hand, heart pounding in my ears. Khalid whispered, "Fear means you're alive. Courage means you move anyway." Those words stuck with me. There was a moment in training I'll never forget. A 40-foot wall we were meant to scale during a storm. I hesitated. Lightning cracked across the sky. Brielle shouted, "You go first or we all stay down here." So I climbed. Every inch burned. But when I pulled myself over and turned to help the others, something shifted. I wasn't the weakest anymore. I was one of them. The night we passed final drills, we sat around a fire, just 6 of us left from 21. Luca handed me his flask and said, "You didn't break. That makes you family." Those words meant more than my certificate. In those early days, I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to survive the storm within. Every bruise was proof that I hadn't quit. Every scar was earned. I started journaling late at night. The pages caught the things I couldn't say aloud. About fear, about ambition, about how much I missed home. Sometimes I'd stare at a photo of my brother, tucked in my helmet. I'd whisper, "I hope I'm making you proud." One day, during hand-to-hand drills, I was thrown down hard. I felt something crack, my ribs. But I got up, didn't say a word, finished the round. Khalid pulled me aside afterward. "You don't have to die to prove you're strong." That was the first time anyone in uniform told me to be gentle with myself. I didn't listen right away. We got our assignments. I was to be deployed to the front, a logistics and communications officer. But I would be in the field, in danger, in the reality of everything I had trained for. The night before deployment, I called my mother. We hadn't spoken in years. She picked up and there was silence. Then, "Are you okay?" "No," I said, "but I will be." She didn't cry. She just said, "Be careful and come home." That was the start of our healing. Quiet, but real. As I packed my gear that night, I felt something deep in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. I wasn't going to war to fight, I was going to serve. War doesn't come with a warning, it comes with silence and then screams. My first deployment was in the desert. The air was thick with dust, heat, and tension. The silence was loud. You could feel the danger in your bones. The locals were wary of us. Some were kind, others spat at our feet. One morning, a young boy smiled at me. That same night, I saw his lifeless body in the rubble after a crossfire. His eyes stayed with me. We were constantly on edge. The mission was routine, they said, but nothing about being shot at feels routine. We patrolled villages, deactivated IEDs, and ran aid missions. We tried to build trust, but fear always lingered. It was in the stairs, in the quiet footsteps behind us, in the children who stopped laughing. Our camp was surrounded by sand and silence. At night, we would sit around in shifts, sharing stories. I remember Luca making jokes to hide his fear, Brielle cleaning her rifle in complete silence, Khalid always writing something in a small notebook. One night, I asked Khalid what he always wrote. He said, "I write letters to people who may never read them, just in case I don't come back." During one mission in the mountains, an ambush pinned us down. I froze. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I saw Khalid, bleeding. Without thinking, I fired. My first kill. I remember the man's face. He was barely older than me. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I kept replaying it. Was there another way? Did I hesitate too long? Khalid sat beside me. "You saved my life," he said. "Don't ever apologize for surviving." Every mission carried a new weight, delivering medical supplies under sniper fire, escorting a convoy through narrow mountain roads littered with potential traps. Once our vehicle hit an IED. The explosion threw us into the air. We survived because Brielle had insisted we wear full gear that day. Later, things got worse. One of our own, Corporal Lewis, was selling information, leaking locations. We found out through an intercepted message. When we confronted him, he looked at me and said, "You don't understand what they promised me." He was taken away silently. We never spoke of it again. But the betrayal stuck. It taught me that not all threats wear enemy uniforms. Some sit beside you at the mess table. We started growing quiet. We trusted less. We laughed less. We watched each other sleep, not just out of duty, but out of need. We were each other's lifeline, and it made every goodbye feel permanent. The desert taught me that not all wounds bleed. Some just whisper quietly and never heal. During a rescue mission, we found a girl barely 10 years old, alone in a ruined building. She had been hiding for 3 days with her brother's lifeless body. I carried her back to base, and she didn't cry. She just held on to my collar and whispered one word: "Safe." That night, I broke down for the first time in months. Zara, who was working with the medics, found me outside the tent. We barely knew each other back then. She didn't speak. She just sat beside me and held my hand. I started journaling every day. Writing gave the pain somewhere to go. My notebook became my therapist, my mirror, my memory. I wrote, "Today I learned that courage sometimes means not pulling the trigger, and other times it means living with the fact that you did." Our final mission before rotation was meant to be simple: escort a supply convoy to a refugee camp. Midway, we were attacked by rogue militia. It turned into a firefight in the middle of a sandstorm. I lost count of the bullets. Luca was hit in the leg. Brielle covered us while I dragged him behind a broken truck. Khalid led the push back. We lost a driver. 2 civilians died. We survived, but it didn't feel like a win. Back at base, we were told we'd be rotating out in a week. Relief? Guilt? I didn't know what I felt, just empty. Zara found me again. "You carry everyone else," she said. "Let someone carry you." She became my escape. We talked about books, planets, stupid things, and I began to heal, just a little. But the desert stayed with me. It etched itself into my bones. The smell of sand, blood, oil, and heat, the sound of a radio crackling, the taste of fear, and the truth I never stopped hearing in my head. War doesn't just scar your body, it rearranges your soul. It wasn't just my body that got injured, it was everything inside. Operation Black Echo was supposed to be clean, fast, in and out. We had intel on a hostage situation, women and children. We moved in at dawn, silent as ghosts, but the silence was too perfect. And perfection in war is always a trap. The compound exploded. Flames, screams, debris. My ears rang for hours. Brielle and Luca were gone before I could call their names. Khalid lost his right arm. And I was buried in rubble with metal lodged in my leg. I crawled, dragging Khalid behind me. My rifle strap was my tourniquet. My body was screaming, but my mind was silent. Nothing but the mission. We made it back. The next few days were a blur. Medics, blood, white ceilings. My hearing was gone in one ear. My leg required 6 surgeries. They told me I might never walk properly again. The hospital became my battlefield. Each day I had to fight pain, silence, and the ghosts of my team. I'd wake up crying without knowing why. I'd forget what day it was. Therapy was hell, physical and mental. I hated it. I hated everyone. I even hated Khalid for surviving, because I didn't want to be the one who lived. I tried to walk too early and collapsed, screamed at my nurse, refused food for 2 days. And then I met Zara. Zara had been a frontline medic. A roadside blast left her blind. She didn't wear pain on her face. She wore calm. She walked with grace and spoke like wind through trees, soft but unshakable. She found me on the hospital roof one night, sitting in a wheelchair, staring at nothing. "You thinking about leaving?" she asked. I didn't answer. "I used to think about it too," she said, until I realized my scars weren't curses. They were proof I survived something most never will. That night, we sat together in silence, and for the first time since the blast, I felt something other than broken. Zara became my lifeline. She helped me relearn how to walk. Every step was pain, but every step with her beside me felt possible. She taught me yoga, taught me to breathe, to forgive myself. She'd laugh when I stumbled and cheer when I made it 2 steps further than the day before. We shared coffee every morning, stories every night. I told her about Luca's jokes and Brielle's fierce calm. She told me about losing her fiancé before the war. We cried, we screamed, we healed. Then one day she kissed me. I didn't know how to react. Part of me felt like I didn't deserve love. Another part felt like I had just been handed life again. "I don't need you to be fixed," she said. "I need you to be real." We weren't just 2 broken people. We were building something new from the pieces. But recovery wasn't a straight line. There were nights I screamed in my sleep, waking up soaked in sweat. Zara would hold my hand, guide my breathing, whisper, "You're safe. you're here. I started journaling again. My entries weren't heroic, they were messy, honest. I walked 10 steps today. I cried twice. I remembered Brielle's laugh, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. Khalid came to visit, arm gone, eyes tired. "You're not the same," he said. "No," I replied. "I hope I'm not." He smiled. "That's how I know you're still fighting." I started helping others in the hospital, teaching physical therapy routines, talking with new patients, sharing pieces of my story. Zara called me the firewalker, said I carried the flame of everyone I lost. One afternoon, I was invited to speak to a group of incoming medical trainees. I stood with a cane and told them, "You won't save everyone, but sometimes your presence is the thing that saves a soul." After that, something shifted in me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. I applied to return to duty, not as a soldier in combat, but as a trainer, a mental health advocate, a living example of what recovery looks like. And on the day I was approved, Zara waited outside my room with 2 cups of coffee. "To new beginnings?" she asked. "To scars that tell stories," I replied. We toasted quietly under a rising sun, and I felt ready, not whole, but ready. I didn't survive to stay silent. I survived to speak. Coming back to duty wasn't easy. I limped through the gates of the training facility with my papers in one hand and my doubts in the other. Everyone looked at me like I was something fragile, a warning, a reminder of what could happen. But I didn't come back to be a ghost. I came back to teach others how to survive. I was assigned to train new recruits, fresh, wide-eyed, full of fire. Some looked at me with admiration. Some looked at my cane and wondered how I could still serve. I didn't explain myself. I just showed them. Push-ups, drills, tactical decision games, and mental wellness classes. I was harder on the women, not out of cruelty, but because I knew what the world would throw at them. I didn't want them to break where I once did. Every week I wrote letters to Zara, still posted at the recovery hospital. She wrote back stories of new patients, healing moments, and hope. She reminded me I had a life outside the uniform, a future. Then came the tunnel collapse. 2 soldiers were trapped during a night training drill. Underground, unstable, suffocating. I didn't hesitate. I volunteered. Crawling into that tight space brought everything back. The explosion, the smoke, the silence. But I pushed forward. One of the recruits was pinned under debris. He was shaking, mumbling, barely conscious. I spoke to him, told him stories, made him laugh, kept him alive until the others pulled us out. When I emerged, covered in dirt and sweat, the recruits clapped. But I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt alive. That night, Zara surprised me. She'd taken leave and come to see me. We sat on the roof of the barracks, sharing tea. "I missed this," I told her. "I missed you," she said, "but I think I love this version of you even more." We talked for hours about what we'd been through, what we'd lost, what we still carried. I told her I wanted to propose. She laughed and said, "Too late. I already bought the rings." Our wedding was quiet. No crowd, no uniforms, just wildflowers, mountains, and 2 souls who had been through fire and still chose love. Afterward, I launched a nonprofit, one focused on helping women veterans navigate post-service life. Therapy, job training, community. I spoke at events telling my story, not to impress, but to connect. They called me fragile, I'd say. They called me emotional, but I am not broken, I am reforged. At one event, a young recruit came up in tears. "I was going to quit," she whispered, "but then I heard you speak." And in that moment, I knew my purpose had shifted. I wasn't just here to fight, I was here to lift others. I still woke up some nights shaking, still stared too long at the ceiling, counting breaths. But I had love beside me, purpose ahead of me, and a history behind me that I no longer feared. I visited my mother more. One day she held my hand and said, "You were always stronger than me. I just couldn't see it back then." We cried together and healed. I visited Khalid. He was retired now, peaceful. He told me, "You did what I never could. You turned pain into a mission." I left him a copy of my first published book, Through the Fire. He cried when he saw the dedication. For those who stayed and for those who couldn't. Life moved on, but I remained present in it. I planted a garden with Zara. We adopted a dog. We laughed more than we cried. And I kept writing letters, speeches, memories, because this is not the story of a soldier. This is the story of a soul who refused to be silenced by war. And it's only just beginning. They say once a soldier, always a soldier. But what they don't say is how the mission changes. After launching my nonprofit, I thought I had found peace. But peace doesn't mean stillness. It means having a reason to keep moving forward. I started getting requests from schools, governments, and international groups to speak, to teach, to train. At first, I hesitated. What did I know about global outreach? But Zara smiled and said, "You know more than anyone what people survive. Share that." So I did. My first trip was to a remote refugee camp overseas. Women and girls who had escaped war, trafficking, and worse. I listened more than I spoke. Their eyes reminded me of the young girl I carried from that rubble long ago. One night, after a long session of trauma counseling, a woman hugged me and whispered, "You made me feel like I exist again." That night, I sat under the stars and cried quietly. Not for sadness, but for the weight of hope. Back home, I began building a global branch of the foundation. We named it Ashes to Roots, because from destruction, we grow. Zara and I traveled often together now. She ran medical wellness programs while I handled resilience training. We'd return home exhausted but full of purpose. One winter, tragedy struck. Our convoy was hit by a rogue militia. We lost one of our coordinators. I took a bullet to the shoulder, shielding a young boy. The hospital stay was shorter this time, but the emotional wounds reopened. Zara sat beside me every night. "You promised me you wouldn't die a hero," she said, trying to hold back tears. "I didn't," I whispered. "I lived one." My recovery was different this time. Slower, more aware. I began writing again, not just my thoughts, but my full story. The book took 6 months. Every chapter was a scar, every sentence a breath I hadn't taken before. When it was done, I titled it, "The War I Still Carry." It became a bestseller, but more importantly, it became a mirror for other veterans. I received thousands of letters from women saying, "You wrote my pain," and gave me language for it. That's when I knew. My new mission wasn't about teaching people how to survive war. It was teaching them how to live after it. I returned to speak at a graduation ceremony for the military academy. Standing there, In front of young women about to enter the ranks, I shared every truth I knew. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move while your hands still shake. After the speech, a young cadet ran up to me. I watched your interview. My mom never supported me joining, but when she saw your story, she hugged me and said, "Be like her." I held back tears and hugged her. She reminded me of myself. Back home, Zara and I adopted a baby girl, Amani. Her name meant peace. She was born during a storm, but slept like the world was safe. Becoming a mother was the greatest mission of all. Every night I sang her to sleep with stories, not about guns or war, but about bravery, loyalty, and rising again. She didn't know about the scars, but one day she would, and I hoped she'd carry the flame, not the burden. Khalid visited us once, walking slowly with a prosthetic. He held Amani, looked into her eyes, and said, "She's going to change the world." I smiled. She already changed mine. Zara and I created a healing retreat in the mountains, a space for veterans and survivors. We called it Haven Hollow. People came broken, they left blooming, and in every voice I heard, every soul I touched, I found pieces of the soldier I once was, and the woman I had become. Because this is not just the story of a soldier. It's the story of rebirth, of rising again, of choosing love over silence. And now it's the story of legacy. They say once a soldier, always a soldier. But what they don't say is how the mission changes. After launching my nonprofit, I thought I had found peace. But peace doesn't mean stillness. It means having a reason to keep moving forward. I started getting requests from schools, governments, and international groups to speak, to teach, to train. At first, I hesitated. What did I know about global outreach? But Zara smiled and said, "You know more than anyone what people survive. Share that." So I did. My first trip was to a remote refugee camp overseas. Women and girls who had escaped war, trafficking, and worse. I listened more than I spoke. Their eyes reminded me of the young girl I carried from that rubble long ago. One night, after a long session of trauma counseling, a woman hugged me and whispered, "You made me feel like I exist again." That night, I sat under the stars and cried quietly. Not for sadness, but for the weight of hope. Back home, I began building a global branch of the foundation. We named it Ashes to Roots, because from destruction we grow. Zara and I traveled often together now. She ran medical wellness programs while I handled resilience training. We'd return home exhausted but full of purpose. One winter, tragedy struck. Our convoy was hit by a rogue militia. We lost one of our coordinators. I took a bullet to the shoulder, shielding a young boy. The hospital stay was shorter this time, but the emotional wounds reopened. Zara sat beside me every night. "You promised me you wouldn't die a hero," she said, trying to hold back tears. "I didn't," I whispered. "I lived one." My recovery was different this time, slower, more aware. I began writing again, not just my thoughts, but my full story. The book took 6 months. Every chapter was a scar, every sentence a breath I hadn't taken before. When it was done, I titled it, "The War I Still Carry." It became a bestseller. But, more importantly, it became a mirror for other veterans. I received thousands of letters from women saying, "You wrote my pain and gave me language for it." That's when I knew My new mission wasn't about teaching people how to survive war. It was teaching them how to live after it. I returned to speak at a graduation ceremony for the military academy. Standing there in front of young women about to enter the ranks, I shared every truth I knew. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move while your hands still shake. After the speech, a young cadet ran up to me. "I watched your interview. My mom never supported me joining. But when she saw your story, she hugged me and said, 'Be like her.'" I held back tears and hugged her. She reminded me of myself. Back home, Zara and I adopted a baby girl, Amani. Her name meant peace. She was born during a storm, but slept like the world was safe. Becoming a mother was the greatest mission of all. Every night I sang her to sleep with stories, not about guns or war, but about bravery, loyalty, and rising again. She didn't know about the scars, but one day she would, and I hoped she'd carry the flame, not the burden. Khalid visited us once, walking slowly with a prosthetic. He held Amani, looked into her eyes, and said, "She's going to change the world." I smiled. She already changed mine. Zara and I created a healing retreat in the mountains, a space for veterans and survivors. We called it Haven Hollow. People came broken, they left blooming. And in every voice I heard, every soul I touched, I found pieces of the soldier I once was, and the woman I had become. Because this is not just the story of a soldier, it's the story of rebirth, of rising again, of choosing love over silence, and now it's the story of legacy. They say healing isn't linear. I say healing is a spiral. Sometimes you circle back, not to fall, but to rise again. Life had become something beautiful, something quiet. The garden bloomed. Amani giggled in the mornings. Zara's voice still softened my hardest days. But peace has a funny way of revealing buried wounds. It started with a letter. Old paper, faint ink, delivered through my nonprofit's address. It was from the sister of a woman we couldn't save during Operation Black Echo. She wrote, "Her name was Layla. You never knew her, but she prayed for someone like you. Thank you for trying." I read it again and again, tears hitting the page like rain. I had carried guilt for years, for not saving Layla, for not doing enough. The letter opened something in me, a chapter I thought had closed. I started dreaming again, of the explosion, of the rubble, of the screams, but this time the faces were different. They weren't just my squad, they were the people we couldn't save. I went back to therapy. Zara held me through it. She understood. "You can't carry them all, Sophia," she whispered, "but you can honor them." So I did. I built a memorial garden behind Haven Hollow, one tree for every soul lost, every name carved, every life remembered. People came from around the world to walk the garden. Some cried, some smiled, some simply sat and listened to the wind. But the ghosts didn't fully rest. During a speaking trip overseas, I was approached by a journalist. He had evidence suggesting that one of the attacks during our deployment was orchestrated not by enemy forces, but by a corrupt official within our own intelligence branch. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Then I saw the proof. Layla's death, the death of civilians, the broken intel, all connected. I was shaken, not just because of what happened, but because I had unknowingly defended the lie for years. I faced a choice: expose the truth or stay silent to protect the system I once served. Zara looked at me. You always said your voice is your strongest weapon. Use it. So I did. I released a statement. I gave interviews. I testified before a panel. I faced backlash, threats, silence from some of my peers. But I also received letters from families who said thank you, from soldiers who said you gave me the courage to speak. Truth hurt, but truth also healed. One day, as I was leaving a veterans summit, a woman stood by my car, her eyes familiar. I'm Layla's sister, she said. I just wanted to meet you, to tell you, you saved her soul, even if you couldn't save her body. We hugged for a long time. Later that night, I sat with Amani reading her a story. She asked, Mama, were you ever scared? I smiled. All the time. But being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're human. That week, I began writing a second book, Whispers in the Sand, a deeper dive, an unfiltered truth. I traveled less now, choosing to build more programs locally, focusing on trauma recovery for families, not just veterans. Zara and I opened a small school inside Haven Hollow, a place where children of survivors could learn, grow, and understand strength beyond war. Life slowed in rhythm but deepened in meaning. Each morning I walked the memorial garden. I whispered names, I thanked them. I promised them their pain wasn't lost, because healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without breaking. And though shadows remain, I have learned to dance with them. This is not just the story of a warrior. It is the story of what happens when truth meets courage. And still, it's only the middle of the journey. Sometimes the strongest walls we face are the ones we build inside ourselves. Years had passed since the last bullet, the last battlefield. Yet somehow my deepest battles were just beginning. Amani was now 6, bright, endlessly curious, and brave in ways I never imagined. She asked questions about everything. Some I was ready for, others not yet. One evening, as we planted new seeds in the garden, she looked up and asked, "Did you ever hurt someone, Mama?" I paused, hands in the soil. "Yes," I said honestly, "but I also saved people, and I try to grow things now instead." That moment stayed with me. I realized the next mission wasn't external. It wasn't in another speech, another retreat, or another article. It was inside, deep, buried, untouched. So I went back into therapy, this time for the childhood trauma I had locked away. The loss of my brother, the silence from my mother, the pressure to be invincible. It wasn't easy. I resisted, denied, dismissed, until I couldn't anymore. My therapist asked me to write letters I'd never send. To the people who shaped me, wounded me, loved me. I wrote to my brother, "I still hear your laugh in the rain. I still feel your absence in my breath. I didn't protect you, but I made your name my strength." I wrote to Brielle, "You were more than a soldier. You were a sister. I never said goodbye, so I'll just keep saying thank you." And I wrote to myself, "Dear Sophia, I forgive you." That letter broke me, and then it rebuilt me. Zara and I grew closer than ever. We talked about adopting again. We visited old friends, traveled not to work, but to just be. I began leading private healing sessions, quiet circles in Haven Hollow where we burned letters, shared tears, and spoke names of the lost. One session, a woman stood and whispered, I didn't think I'd ever breathe again until today. That was it. That was why I was still here. I started mentoring young officers, especially women of color and queer recruits who felt invisible in uniform. I told them, you don't have to become stone to be respected. You just have to be undeniable. Media outlets returned. They wanted more interviews, more headlines. But I declined most of them now. I wanted intimacy, not attention. Zara and I began recording audio journals, conversations about love, trauma, identity. We published them as a podcast called Beneath the Surface. It reached thousands of listeners. The most played episode was titled, Healing is Loud. I watched Amani grow into a leader. She organized a fundraiser at her school for trauma victims. She said, helping people makes me feel strong, like you. I smiled. Helping people is the bravest thing anyone can do. One afternoon, I visited Khalid's grave. I sat beside the stone for hours, whispering updates like he was still listening. I'm okay, I said at the end, and I hope you are too. At home, I added a bench to the memorial garden. On the plaque, I inscribed, "For those still fighting, even when the war is over." Zara surprised me on our anniversary with a photo album. On the last page, she wrote, "You are not a chapter, Sophia. You are the whole damn story." That night, we sat by the fire, Amani curled between us, stars blinking overhead. I closed my eyes and felt it, not peace, but something better, presence. Because this story isn't about war anymore. It's about what grows after the fire. And we're still planting. They say the past is behind you, but for some of us it walks beside us, whispering what it remembers. The more I healed, the more I realized how deeply rooted pain could be. Even when your limbs stop shaking, your soul remembers the tremors. It began with a dream. I was back in the desert. The sun burned too bright. I was alone, no radio, no weapon, just silence. And in that silence, I heard my name. I woke up gasping, not afraid, but unsettled. Zara stirred beside me. Was it them again? I nodded. You should talk to someone, she said softly. So I did, not a therapist this time, but the voices from my past. I began writing a series of reflective essays, letters to the women I served with, the lives I'd lost, the younger version of myself. They weren't for publication, they were for understanding. I called the project Embers and Echoes, because some fires don't die, they smolder. Each essay peeled back another layer. Memories I thought I'd buried returned with clarity. One was about the day before Operation Black Echo. Brielle and I were laughing about how she couldn't cook to save her life. I wrote, "Even in the shadow of death, you gave me joy." Another was about Corporal Lewis, the betrayer. I wrote, "You taught me trust is a fragile thing." But even in betrayal, I learned who I was. And one letter, the hardest, was to my mother. You tried to protect me from pain, and in doing so, you became part of it. But I see you now. I forgive you now. These writings opened new doors inside me. I started a course at Haven Hollow called The Long Homecoming. Veterans and civilians sat in circles, sharing what came after survival. We didn't talk about combat. We talked about divorce, about insomnia, about learning to parent, about hugging your child and feeling unworthy of love. Amani started joining me on some of the walks around the memorial garden. She asked questions, big ones, like, why do people hurt each other? I told her the truth. because sometimes we forget how to care, but people like you remind us. I began painting again, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I painted scars, not wounds, scars, because scars meant we endured. Zara said my art felt like exhaling. I agreed. We hosted a showcase at Haven Hollow. Survivors brought poetry, sketches, music. The event was called Unspoken, and it was the loudest silence I'd ever felt. One visitor, a young man with burn scars down his face, stood by my painting titled Grief's Armor. He whispered, "This looks like me. This feels like me." We hugged, and neither of us needed to say more. I was approached by a university to create a guest lecture series. I hesitated, unsure if I could step back into academic settings, but then I remembered my voice had always been the mission. My first lecture was titled Strength After Survival. I walked on stage in boots and a blazer, heart pounding. And then I told the truth about war, about loss, about loving a woman when the world told me not to, about being a mother and wondering if I was doing enough. And they listened. Afterward, a student approached me and said, "You didn't just teach me, you gave me permission to be." That night, I sat by the fire again, Amani fast asleep, Zara reading a worn copy of The War I Still Carry. And I whispered to the flames, "Thank you for not destroying me. Thank you for showing me how to burn and still build." This chapter wasn't about pain. It was about what remains after the echoes fade. Because even in the silence, I'm still telling the story, and I'm not done yet. There comes a point where the past stops chasing you and you start walking towards something new. Winter fell over Haven Hollow like a hush. Snow on the benches, frost on the windows. It was the first season in years where everything felt still, and I didn't feel guilty for it. I found joy in the simplest routines. Amani's hand in mine during morning walks, Zara humming while slicing apples in the kitchen, the dogs sleeping by the fire. For once, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. Not a speech, not an answer, just presence. But even in stillness, growth whispers. I began considering something I never had before. Stepping away, not quitting, but transitioning. Handing over the foundation to a younger team, mentoring from the side. At first it scared me. Who was I without the mission? Zara saw it in my silence. "You're not leaving your purpose," she said. "You're evolving with it." I started training my successor, Nina, a fierce, compassionate veteran who reminded me of a younger me, but smarter and with fewer walls. We worked side by side for 6 months. I taught her leadership. She taught me surrender. I spent more time writing, not about war, but about joy, recovery, and what it means to create after you've survived destruction. My third book, The Edge of Becoming, was born in that quiet. It wasn't a memoir. It was part guide, part poetry, part love letter to the next generation of fighters and feelers. During its release, I was offered a national award for service and contribution. I declined the stage. Instead, I sent a video message. "I didn't survive to be honored. I survived to honor others. And I hope you find something worth surviving for." The video went viral. Messages poured in from soldiers, survivors, students, mothers, people who never saw themselves in stories until now. That month, Zara and I took Amani to a quiet island retreat. No press, no projects, just oceans and time. On our last night there, Amani stood in the sand and shouted into the sea, I'm not afraid of anything. I laughed, but my eyes filled with tears because I believed her. And maybe that's what healing does. It doesn't erase your fear, it shows you that your love is bigger than it. When we returned, I hosted my last public event as director of the foundation. It was a candlelight vigil, survivors and families, volunteers and voices. No banners, no cameras, just fire and silence. I spoke briefly. I used to think survival was the goal. Now I know it's just the beginning. What you build after, that's the legacy. I passed the torch to Nina with a steady hand, and I watched as she lit her own. That night I walked through the memorial garden alone. No ghosts, just echoes, soft ones, kind ones. And I whispered to the trees, "Thank you for every scar. Thank you for turning me into something worth growing." At home, Zara and I began planning a new space, an arts and healing center designed by survivors for the world. Amani drew the first blueprint, a big open space with a tree in the middle. She called it the Heart Room. I asked why. She said, "Because everything grows from here." She was right. This chapter isn't the end. It's the edge of becoming. Because there are more gardens to plant, more stories to tell, and I'm still listening. Even after the final chapter, the story lingers, in the silence, in the people, in the ground we leave behind. Life beyond the mission had a different rhythm. No morning briefings, no travel itineraries, just the sun rising over Haven Hollow and the smell of coffee drifting through the house. Simpler, but not smaller. I woke up every day not asking what needed to be done, but what needed to be felt. And that changed everything. Zara was thriving in her work. She'd started offering trauma-informed birth coaching for survivors. She said it helped women take control of their bodies again. Amani started writing short stories, little fictions, some about warriors, some about foxes and fairies, and some about me. One night she read me one. The woman had fire in her bones, but she built homes with her hands. She could break walls or grow roses. She chose roses. I cried. Some days I still felt the old ghosts. I'd pass by the wall of medals and remember each one cost a piece of someone. But they no longer haunted me. They reminded me. I began teaching part-time at the university. Just one class, Narratives of Survival. It was packed. Not because I was famous, but because people were starving for honesty. Each week we unpacked stories from soldiers, refugees, abuse survivors, even artists. And each week I watched students slowly realize survival is art. I didn't write as often, but I spoke more. Conversations at the dinner table, walks with strangers, quiet check-ins with old friends. Legacy, I found, isn't always loud. It's the story someone tells about you when you're not in the room. One fall evening, we hosted a gathering at Haven Hollow. Old squad mates, families, former students, survivors, people who had crossed paths and found something worth holding on to. We didn't call it a reunion. We called it what remains. There was music, laughter, candles, and no agenda but being together. At one point, someone stood up and asked me to say something. I paused, looked at all the faces, and said, "We are not defined by what hurt us, but by what we chose to do next. We are what remains when the fire settles, and I like who we've become." Afterward, people hugged, cried, shared. Amani danced in the middle of the circle while Zara and I watched, arms around each other. I felt whole. In the quiet weeks that followed, I started planting a new row of trees near the back of the garden. This time, not for the fallen, but for the future. Each tree bore a name: hope, courage, forgiveness, joy, rebirth. And one, the tallest one, I named Becoming. I carved a quote at its base. This tree grew from ashes. May you rest here and rise again. Zara joined me one afternoon, hands covered in dirt, cheeks flushed from laughing. You know, she said, we were always trying to save the world. And now? I asked. Now we're giving it back. As winter came again, I sat on the porch with a blanket and tea, watching Amani build a snow fort with neighborhood kids. I listened to her laugh echo across the yard, and I realized something. Peace isn't something you earn, it's something you allow. And stories like mine, ours, don't end. They just change shape. So if someone asks years from now who I was, tell them I was a woman who loved, who lost and rose, who gave, who stayed, who spoke, and who in the quiet planted a garden so others could bloom. Because even when the story ends, what remains still grows.